I'm Matt Leighty. I'm originally from Richmond, Virginia, and came all the way out here to go to school at School of Public Policy. Who's the furthest here? You are?
Probably.
Yeah, where?
Toronto.
You will probably win the award there. I started writing grants here for Dr. Hawken, who was then econometrics and statistics here at Pepperdine. And so I had the traditional introduction to becoming a grant writer, which is I had a job and I got handed a sheet of folders and said, if you would like to keep your job, you have to get this grant, right? And that's the way most people get into grant writing, or a significant number of them. So it's always good to have some pressure. And so I said, great, I can write this grant. Is there any sort of template or something I can look at to know if I'm doing it right? And Angela said, nope. So I just had to write it. And she beat up on it. And then I rewrote it and she beat up on it. And I rewrote it and she beat up on it. And the day only 50% of that grant was covered in red, I went out for a beer to celebrate, because that was the furthest I could imagine getting along there. And so Pepperdine really taught me to write, and to write well. I had Dr. Kaufman, who you have to write a lot for, and Dr. McAllister, who you have to write very particularly for. And so writing and writing and writing was part of it. But now that I do grants, it's actually about 20% of the job is writing and 80% is other stuff. I spend as much time in Microsoft Excel as I do in Microsoft Word. Google Sheets is terrible and never use it. But a lot of it is just workflow. So I wanted to talk to you guys about why I think you should pursue or be interested in learning grant writing as a skill. Is that useful to you at this time? Do you want more wild stories about my times here and going out for beers with, Dr. Kaufman or Dr. McAllister, or do you want the grant writing stuff? Okay. Grant writing is, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm probably the only person, I don't know anyone in here, so I feel like that's why the grant writing is probably focused, but I would love some real world life stories.
Real world life stories of grant writing.
Yeah.
I got a lot. So, grant writing is a lot like track and field, is kind of the way I've taken to describing it. You say, like, I'm a track and field athlete. That doesn't really give you a lot of information. You have some follow-up questions there. Are you a shot putter? Do you run long distances? Are you a hurdler? There's different types of grants. A lot of the ones that you're familiar with or you hear about are big federal grants. Department of Energy gave out a grant, or Pepperdine received a grant, or whatever. So there's federal pockets of money. Those tend to be larger grants. You also have state grants. You have localities give out grants. But then you also have this world of private foundations and corporations in terms of what they do and how they give. And so each grant requires sort of a different approach and a different technique. So a lot of what you learn with grant writing is to know your audience and to be very audience specific. If you're writing a federal grant about a kid's after school program, you need a lot of details. You need a lot of who, what, when, where, and why. You need a logic model. You need program goals, objectives, outcomes. If I'm writing a grant to the Conrad Hilton Foundation about that same program, I can cut a lot of that out and make it more narrative style. The way I talk about it is there's head funders and there's heart funders. There's people who are interested in the Sarah McLachlan sad SPCA commercial when the music comes on and everybody feels bad and you want to give money because you like dogs, but you have no idea where that money's going. That's a good example of like head funding, heart funding. You just feel a connection and you're inspired to give, right? When you get into competitive grant writing, for the most part, everybody's on board that there's a need for something. So you're less in the space of writing compelling needs about why we need to do stuff and more how you do it. You're writing, effectively, a good grant should read as a project plan. So if you write it and then leave, somebody else can come in and see, all right, in the first month, I'm supposed to do this, this, and this, and here's the goals, and here's the outcomes, and here's the objectives. This is why we're doing this. I'm in a great position where I am a grant writer, not a grant doer. Grant administration is a completely separate task, and in fact, having to be in charge of grant administration here under the grants that Angela and I got is why I left and went to UCLA with a specific stipulation that I just got to write them, and if they got them, they had to deal with that mess, right? So there are different aspects to the grant process as well. Grants are, like, if you're interested in public policy and doing things, we're all familiar with statutory, regulatory, and judicial levels of policy making and attacking. What appealed to me about grants is you get to bypass a lot of stuff. You don't have to convince too many people of things. I don't know if you've learned in one of your classes here about how heavily people discount the future, but if you go to somebody who is reluctant to be involved with a program that you're doing, but you say, can I do this program? It costs you nothing. I'm going to go get a grant for $500,000, and if I get it, can I do it? They tend to say yes, and then you just have to go find the money and go do it. And you get to skip over a lot of the steps that other people have to go through, a lot of the things that maybe it's not as impactful as getting a major healthcare bill passed that has the ability to do a lot of stuff there, but you get to do it rather quickly and rather anonymously and rather autonomously. You get to make decisions yourself. Grant writing is also not done in a vacuum. You don't just get to make up programs and things like that. Your whole job is to go in and find people who do really good work and help them tell that story to an audience so that audience will fund them and give them money. So if you're going to do that, you have to learn the different styles of audiences. What do corporate funders like? Why is Bank of America different than Wells Fargo? What do foundations like? What do large foundations like? What do small foundations like? How do I do this for a federal government? Kind of as we were saying, as I was saying, like the track and field stuff. What I ended up becoming was a decathlete. I'm pretty good at a lot of the different events, but I'm also smart enough to know I'm never going to get a National Science Foundation grant. It's just never going to happen. I don't have the technical skills to do that. So if one of my clients needs or wants a National Science Foundation grant, we got to go find somebody else to do that. The humanities are honestly way easier to fake if you don't know a lot of stuff. So you can do that, and I've gotten some some national humanities grants and stuff like that. But that's what we did, and we focus specifically on nonprofits. We do some university work, but for the majority of the time, we focus on nonprofits who are really good at client services. What are client services in a nonprofit? Nonprofits are all businesses. They're literally registered as corporations. So they're all LLCs with then an added tax exempt status. It's said a lot in nonprofit circles, like probably overly said, but like nonprofit is a tax status, not a business strategy. They all need money to keep their doors open and to keep going. One of the big distinctions is that nonprofits have different clients than customers. So when you have, you sell a widget, you sell it, the person who buys it is your client and your customer, right? For nonprofits, if we serve homeless people, they're not paying for those services. They're our clients, but our customers are the people who pay us to provide those services, be it a government grant, a foundation grant, a corporate grant, whatever. So what I look for is I don't deal with client-facing stuff. I'm not out in a school delivering programming, I'm not on the street working with homeless services agencies. It's a bad analogy, but I watched like Band of Brothers, the World War II documentary. I'm not on the front line with that group. I'm the supply train that's trying to bring them the stuff that they need to get their job done. Less glamorous, still important, but don't forget you're not as important as them. You're there to make their jobs easier, their lives better, and get them the stuff that they need. And so if you can do that quickly and efficiently and pretty well, they tend to like you and then refer you on to somebody else. And that is how we went from me having one tiny client in Long Beach that paid me the outrageous sum. I couldn't believe they were going to pay me $1,000 a month to write grants for them. It was more than I could ever imagine. And today we have 17 clients in Virginia, Washington State, and California. I've got 5 grant writers on staff. We've done about 75. It might be as high as $100 million. It's hard to track. We've done at least 13 in 2022. So I know that is true. And we keep that going. And there's some simple things that you can do along the way. Like, I like it. For me as a public policy person, I found it really hard to drill down. And people would say, like, you really need to specialize. What do you want to go into healthcare? And I was like, healthcare is so boring. Do you want to go into education policy? Education policy is so boring, right? Do you want to go into like broadband internet? And then I just fall asleep because broadband is the most boring subject that I've ever encountered in my entire life, right? And so I liked learning about these things. I liked being involved. I liked picking apart little details. But once I went past the initial, like the subject matter, you can be like deep or wide. I really enjoyed learning about a lot of different things and then finding people who were really smart and went that extra level deep. I don't do that. I have a very cursory level knowledge of a lot of different subjects. I can tell you about the problem of ketone in the James River. I can tell you about corneal abrasions in Nepal. I can tell you all sorts of weird stuff that smarter people than me have figured out, written up, done that stuff. The job of the grant writer is translation. How do you translate all this information into 2 things? An actionable plan. Sometimes the nonprofits can lose a little bit of that. So you're helping them streamline their big vision down into smaller things. And you're translating it for a smart person. I literally write all of my grants for my mom. That's true. She's a smart lady who has no idea what I'm talking about, right? That's a great test audience for you in writing any of your papers here at Pepperdine or whatever. Who are you writing to? Like, you're just writing to write? Like, who specifically? Are you writing for Lloyd? Are you writing for whatever? If you can pick a stand-in person, a real person, so that you can read it over again and say, would Marty Leighty understand the problem of ketone in the James River and the specific actions that we're going to do to correct that? And does this budget seem reasonable? That's who you want to do, right? That's what you want to do, so that at the end, somebody who's not a subject matter expert can read and understand why what you're talking about is important and how you do it. And there's some math involved. So if you're doing an after-school program, a lot of my clients hadn't done this, but what we do is run the total cost. You guys cost $1 million a year to keep the door open. You serve this many kids. Let's divide the kids by the dollars, and it's $250 per year per kid. And then the question is that a good deal? That is not a decision that you make in a vacuum. I had a program that cost $57,000 a person and only worked for about half of them, right? That sounds on its face like a pretty terrible program, right? You're laughing, right? That's awful. The program took mentally ill homeless people who had been living on the streets for 5 years or longer, and the people that it worked for at the end of the program lived on their own and had a job, right? That does seem worth it, right? For 57, that's pretty cheap. So you've got to figure out, is this number make sense? For the after-school programs, I think, would I pay $250 a year to send my kid to this? If the answer is yes, then yes, we've got a great program. And if I'm thinking, this is a little pricey, maybe it's not a great program. And that's actually a challenge. I've gotten in there with some clients. I look at their numbers and I think, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't believe in this. So you've got to believe in what you're doing and feel good about it. With every single one, I've got 17 clients, and if you ask me to list them all in a row, I probably couldn't do it right now. Nevertheless, when I do talk about them, we talk about we and us, and we have plans, and we have visions, and we really help them to hone in and get better. It's a lot of coaching, it's a lot of stuff. Being a contractor, you also play the role of therapist, because you're a nice outside role that they can call and complain about all the stuff that they wouldn't complain about otherwise. I'm on the East Coast. Nobody in Seattle is going to hear, me when the largest cornea bank in the world is having problems and they got to complain about stuff, right? So it's a great way to enter in and do that stuff. And you can do it, really grants apply to any of the things that you're going to do in public policy anywhere, whether you're with a local government, a state government, a federal government, or like a private agency. I do grants for Dominion Energy, which is like the Southern California Edison of Virginia. It's like equivalent. And so there's corporate grants. I worked for Newport News Shipbuilding, which is the largest manufacturer and employer in Virginia. They have grant writing needs too. Everybody has grant writing needs. If you were to go on Indeed right now and just put in grant writer, you're going to find tons of stuff everywhere. Grant writers are a hard position to fill. Average length of time in position is less than a year. There's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of need. So people really do need you out there. And it's a skill that if you're applying for a job as like a deputy city manager and you add that you were part of a grant in there, you're going to get noticed because localities don't have the time, don't have the space to do that. And a lot of it is really just time. Sometimes I think of my job as like, I'm a garbage man, right? It's a job that like most of us could do, but nobody really wants to. So I get that job and then I made it my own and I'm really good at it. And then we were able to grow it into something bigger. If you find that space where you're really good at something that everybody else hates, you found yourself in like a nice little niche. I recommend exploring the idea of being a consultant. Today, like I've got 5 employees. They all have health care. Blows my mind. I never thought I'd do that. You know, when I graduated here, I was working in the library. It was 2010. There were no jobs anywhere. And the reason I got my first grant writing gig, Angela was returning a book to the library. I was like, what are you doing? I was like, looking for jobs. And she's like, I just got a grant. You're my new project director. And I started Monday, you know. We wrote another grant and that's how I became a grant writer. You never know what's gonna like take you or turn you or spin you or do that. But within grant writing, you know, I got to explore all of the things that are interesting for whatever reason. I know a lot about like wastewater treatment facilities, you know, everybody's really into wastewater treatment facilities, right? You want a good example? Go up to Morro Bay. Really innovative stuff around wastewater treatment, guys. But there's really cool stuff happening in every single avenue of public policy. And when you're doing grants, you're working with the people who are taking it the next level further, the next level further. And they have to, I don't know anything about wastewater treatment, but my people who do, they're writing this really cool grant. They don't know how to write. They don't trust themselves. They struggle to write an email. Doesn't mean that they're not smart or whatever. They just don't do that on the regular. So they need you to come in as a pro and take your public policy knowledge and your skill set and your ability to do goals and objectives and outcomes and measurement and all that stuff and apply it in a way that says, here's how we're going to write up your stuff so that people can understand how and why you're cool and unique. They're terrible at telling their own stories, as are we all, right? Like, I'm terrible. Like, the worst part of my day was having to write that bio for coming here, right? Like, I hate writing about myself. I don't want to write about myself. I'm terrible at it, right? Like, that was not fun. But it's a lot easier to write about other people, right? It was really nice to get that introduction. Was a very flattering one. But on the daily, I'm not writing my resume that's like, oh, God, that's awful. I'll write your resume and make you sound really good. But, like, I need help to write it about myself. And a lot of people also need that perspective to write about themselves. I always start with asking my clients to look for superlatives. I'm looking for first, biggest, best, only, largest, any of that stuff. I'm wanting, did a local elected official give you some sort of award? Did you win? Are you in the top 10 of this or that or whatever? What's going to distinguish you from this? You're in a competitive environment, right? We might right here all together be like, I love the Boys and Girls Club. But if I'm writing a grant for the YWCA, I'm crushing that Boys and Girls Club. And that money's coming to me, right? And to my organization. And there's a reason I picked the YWCA over the Boys and Girls Club to be my client. And it's not just money. It's because I looked at how they serve their client list. I saw the outcomes. I saw their customer list. That's the people who are paying them to serve the clients. And I realized that they have a lot to do in terms of customer acquisition. This is all real businessy. I really only went over to the business school to play ping pong. Is the ping pong table still there? They got a ping pong table in the business school, guys. You gotta slip over there and they let anybody use it. You look just like a business school student, right? So that's how it works in a nutshell. And so today, I'm working on a hydrogen plant in South Carolina, right? And then I'm gotta go do a capital campaign statement. We gotta raise $29 million for a botanical garden. You're never bored, I get to learn about everything except broadband. So, any questions about anything?
Yeah, I have one right now that I can think of. So when coming from like the nonprofit world, what are reasons nonprofits don't get grants? Like
That they don't get grants?
Like is it because it's just poorly written or?
Yes.
Okay.
There's a number of reasons to make yourself I would call that how do you get grant ready as a nonprofit? And this will be more specific about nonprofits. You got to have all your documents in order. So a lot of people call me and they're like, I'm looking for a grant writer. I need some grants for my nonprofit, right? And I'm like, great, let's get started. Tell me about your nonprofit. And then I've learned over the years to be more specific with my questions because about 50% of the time we get far down in the conversation and I realize you don't have a nonprofit. You have the idea of a nonprofit and you're looking to get grants for your idea and nobody cares. You have to do something first. You need a track record and that's the hard part about getting started. But starting a nonprofit is just like starting a business. Do you start a business and immediately go fundraise? No, you do a friends and family round, right? And you do something with that friends and family round that's impressive enough that you attract additional investors. It's no different. So what are the things that will attract additional investors or customers, as I call them? Doing something that's worthwhile. What is that? Well, I don't know. What are you doing? Are you planting trees? Are you running after-school programs? Did you measure anything? I have a lot of nonprofits that they have the 501c3 status, and I ask them, what do you do? And they start listing all the things they've done. Well, during COVID, we printed masks and we delivered food, and then we're delivering books and we're doing this, and it's but what's your skeleton of you as an organization? If I described you in a sentence, what do you do? And they have no mission. They have their mission is to do good. That's good, right? I'm not I'd rather be them than other, than from the business school, right? Just kidding. But they need something to build upon. All this stuff should be steadily increasing. You don't need to be going from serving 20 kids to 200 kids, but you should be able to go from 20 kids to 23, right? And you should be able to explain why you went from 20 kids to 18, but as long as you're right around the stuff, people get hung up on that, and that we set our goals to serve. I have one. We do environmental education programming for Title I students, and we get them on a boat on the James River. They pull up the dredge net, and they actually get to touch fish. And for most of them, they've lived in a city whose main defining feature is a river and never seen the river before, right? Now they're out on the water doing this stuff. We didn't serve 25,000 kids last year. We said we would. We served 23,900. Our funders are not mad about that. We had COVID and all that stuff, right? So you don't have to constantly be hitting 100% awesomeness, but you do need to document. At least we knew we served 23,900. We're not just being I don't know, right? And I always say to people who are starting, if you don't write it down, it never happened. So we had an event. When was it? How many people came? That's useful information to have. So you can say, one of my friends here was Morgan Sacco, who started this women in tech thing. And you track that. I had an event in January, 7 people showed up. And you write that down. You might not feel like it because you might have been hoping for more, a bigger draw or whatever, but you write down 7. And then in February, we had 3. Oh, crap. And then in March, we had 20. And then at the end, you're able to say, I had 12 events, and we served 75 individual people. But why would I care? Like, what else do I want to know about that? Well, it depends on who I am. If I'm a funder who's interested in women in STEM, and I'm a nonprofit foundation, right? Okay. Tell me more about the people that you're serving. Are they young? Are they old? Are they employed? Are they unemployed? Are they in school, out of school? And you try to stick in and connect with that mission or vision the best that you can. They're all got ideas and are going places. And what you want to do is figure out how to adjust yourself to that without, by the way, going and looking at all the available grant opportunities and thinking, here's how I change my organization completely to do this grant. That's called mission drift. You don't want to do that. You want to know who you are and what you want to do, and then you go look for the money to help you do that rather than chase it other ways. So number one things is that you need to have your 990s done. You need audited financial statements. You have a board of people that is like a good board and is not related to each other, right? And most nonprofits start with a related board, right? That's not like a knock. Like it could be like a family who gets together and starts a thing. But at a certain level, you can't be related to one another anymore if you want to get grant money, right? Because there's a question that they ask. Is the board related to each other? Yes or no? And if you hit yes, then the application's done. You can't submit, right? So I advise my clients not to be related to each other on the board when it's possible. And you need like a mission that's clear and specific, and you need a vision of like, a vision's different than a mission. So our mission is to serve these students with the skills and services that they need to graduate high school. Our vision is that one day, every student from Long Beach graduates high school, right? How are we doing in that goal? How does your program work? What's your goals, outcomes, objectives, budget? After I had done grants for, about 4 or 5 years, specifically more geared towards nonprofits rather than like research grants at universities, I realized there's only about 17 grant questions that everybody asks, but they ask them all slightly differently in their own particular way. One of them is like sustainability. Describe the sustainability of your nonprofit. And the real answer that we all want to write is, we don't know, we're doing the best that we can. We hope that the lights are on next year. We have absolutely no idea if we'll be around or continue to do this. It really depends on whether you gave us money. And they're like, why aren't you more sustainable? And we're like, why do you only give grants in 1-year increments? All of you do that, and then you ask why we aren't sustainable. Well, look at yourself. But you can't say that in a grant. So I recommend that you just use the word robust a lot. Our fundraising program is robust, robust grant writing. So when you know what's going to come ahead of you and all the grants, what we do now with all of our clients is that we write this grant to no one, right? And it's all of the questions that I know we're going to be asked during a given year. Maybe not for Bank of America, but then Wells Fargo asked it, and then this other foundation does. So if we're prepared with our template of, I call it like my boilerplate, and I'm working on them now. We just picked up the Santa Monica Mountains as our newest client, And so we write everything down. It's specific. What you say in a grant should be true for 12 months, right? Grants are not built to be flexible. This is not a quick adapting thing. People are like, oh my God, we're almost out of money. We need to get a grant. No, you do not know how this works. You're gonna, at the earliest, get funded 6 months from now, right? So what you said should still be true 6 months later, right? And when you pull all those pieces together, you can really streamline this process. And then you have to get out of your head that because your title is grant writer, that you need to spend all this time writing. That's what a lot of people do, is they sit around and write. I spend my time applying. So when I started with Long Beach Blast, they did 35 grants a year, and my job was to keep up with that. Last year we did 127, right? And instead of making 140,000, we did 600,000, right? most people don't have the time or capacity to write 127 grants. You know, I did that for one client. All total, we did 1,400 grants last year, right? And they're not all the same, right? One might be a Walmart grant for like $2,500. Walmart's actually, I kind of like their grant program. They're nice. It's little, but they spread it out pretty generously, right? Others might be like, I wrote an $8 million like ARPA grant, right? And that one obviously took a lot longer than the, you know, roughly 5 minutes it took to write 9 Walmart grants, right? So they're not all scaled differently. Like Walmart, literally, you go in and you click and you get one sentence to describe your thing. It's like, what do you do? We teach kids? Good. And they're like, here's some money, right? The store managers decide on those local level grants, right? And then the other ones, you have big review committees and all these processes and stuff. So they're not all equal in size and time, but really the number one thing that holds nonprofits back is time and money. They don't have money to pay a full-time grant writer. And so a lot of this work falls on project directors or executive directors, but it's in addition to their existing duties. And so they're just slapping together stuff and sending it out at the last second, and that doesn't work. And so what we have is writing is a creative endeavor. You need time and you have space. So my employees are not allowed to work more than 35 hours a week. That's the rule. You can work less, but never more, right? And it's because I want them like fresh, and I want them creative, and I want them to be able to do that stuff. And when you're stressed and you're tired and you're angry, you just can't do that. And so it's more about work product than it is about like being in a desk and sitting there. But most nonprofits aren't equipped to do that just because they are under-resourced. And literally I went to a nonprofit seminar for executive directors and I snuck in. Grant writers were not supposed to be there, right? But I just wanted to see. And the speaker was like, how many of you guys worry about keeping the lights on? And almost every hand in the room went up. And I didn't know that. You know, you just drive by and you think that like the Boys and Girls Club is in good shape because it's always been there, but you don't realize that like every year is somebody white knuckling it to get them across the line so that they don't shut down, right? Every year. And so when you can go in and help those people who are there, who are doing all this for like low pay and no recognition and kind of wondering if they're even going to have a job next year, feels real good. I feel good about that part. And then I do the corporate work that subsidizes my ability to do a lot of the nonprofit work. Yes?
Yeah. Thank you for the very insightful presentation, I would say, because you just helped me to see that I have a marketable skill. Because just before coming to Pepperdine, I was working on about 4 grants, and I was doing that because no one wants to do it.
Yes.
And the money was there from European Union and from UN organizations, and someone has to put the paperwork together.
Yes.
So now I know I have a marketable
Oh, if you
skill.
can do that and you've done it, you have an incredibly marketable skill. And just to say, I did a grant to the European Union and the United Nations, people are just going to immediately assume that that paperwork is incredibly complicated because it probably is. And just knowing how to get the paperwork filed is such a big deal. And I will finish, but I'll just say, like, local governments, I had a grant recently that I was working on with a local government. And I'm going to say some stuff that sounds like gibberish, but this all makes sense if you do grants. I needed to get Mike assigned as an AOR through login.gov, but Debbie was out because her husband was in the hospital, and she's the eBiz POC, but her grants.gov wasn't in there, so we couldn't assign Mike's AOR status, so the apply button was all grayed out. That all is a real problem that we encountered that is like for real and serious, and all those things that you just need to relax. You have to fill out, first thing you do on a federal grant is this intimidating document that's got like under penalty of perjury all over it. And it's called an SF 424. It sounds real scary. It's a cover sheet. Like that's it. That's all you're dealing with is this is the cover sheet. You do it last and everything that you said in the grant matches back to this thing, right? So you do have a marketable skill and that skill is knowledge, right? And you have it and you can charge for it. You know? Yeah.
So my question is, I just want to hear from your experience. How did you put like yourself into the market? What was, what led you to get that first deal to do a grant as a business?
So the way I started was I moved to Long Beach. I had a 6-month-old. I had no clients, I had no contacts, and I had no backup plan. So I recommend doing that. So what I did was I joined the Long Beach Chamber of Commerce. I got out the directory because their nonprofits are members of the Chamber of Commerce too. And I started going to events, and I had no money, but I was spending like what money I had to go to like some mixer at the Long Beach Chamber of Commerce. And I thought I'd meet nonprofits there. It was so dumb. Like, just nonprofits are not there. It was the worst idea I ever had in my life. But quite accidentally, I discovered that all the board members for the nonprofits are at the Long Beach Chamber of Commerce, right? And I accidentally stumbled myself into the greatest networking opportunity that I could have ever wanted. And so I'm just there, and nobody's met a grant writer. You know, nobody knows what a grant, like, you're like, nobody knows, you know? So they're like, what do you do? And then I just speak at them like I'm speaking it to you for like 3 hours straight about all the wonders of grants and how awesome they are, right? So met a guy, and he's like, I'm on a board of a United Cambodian community, right? Could you write us a grant? We got this grant that's due. And I said, absolutely. And he said, do you have any experience with federal grants? And I was like, absolutely. And for $750, they charged me. I got them a $274,000 grant. So they got a pretty good ROI on that investment. Because did that for the board member. Board members like always are on multiple boards, right? For the most part. So then he recommended me to the other nonprofit that he was working with. And then a board member on that nonprofit did to this nonprofit, to that nonprofit, to this. I've never done a single bit of advertising. Nobody knows who I am, except for people who need to know me. And my name doesn't go on anything. So I'm a grant ghostwriter. So if it's your nonprofit, your name goes on the assignment at the end of it. So my name's never been on a grant. And I like it that way. In Richmond, where I'm at, there's a foundation called, I won't say the name of the foundation, but they give about 8 grants worth $50,000 a year away. Last year I got 5 of them, right? And I have a feeling that they'd be pretty mad if they knew that one grant writer was doing that, right? But they have no idea, because they have no idea I exist. Nobody knows that I exist at all. And that is challenging to grow a business when your strategy is to be unnoticeable. But what happens is the people who need to know. And then you can point to different grants that you do, and then ask your clients for help. So I called one of my clients who loves me, James River Association, founded in 1976 when ketone, a toxic substance, had rendered the James uninhabitable. They've cleaned up the river that runs through my city, the first major river that was explored. And they did great stuff. And I called them and said, hey, I could really use another client. Do you have any ideas? And they made a couple calls, and I got another client, right? Never underestimate the fact that if you're just like really good at what you do and competent about it, that you can get referrals on. And you should also build up your network now and just be nice to everybody that you encounter, and make sure you're like in a great position to just call randos and say, I'm in grad school. I'm interested in how you got to your job position so that I can take courses of study similar or classes or whatever. They'll eat it up. I had lunch with the head of the Writers Guild here in LA. I don't even know anything about that stuff. I just found his email. I thought it'd be cool to have a lunch with him. So I emailed him, was like, I'm interested in how you got there. Would you have lunch with me? And he said, sure. Right? Like, they all want to help you, genuinely, because it's good for them. Because if you go on and are successful, then you got somebody to call, you know, and you never just have any idea. I have a friend of mine who like I hadn't spoken to in 22 years, and you got to have like a bit of a temperament where you're fine calling people and just asking them for stuff, right? But I called her company. I was like, hey, they make signs and T-shirts and banners. They're one of those. And I was like, can I get some of that stuff for like free? And she's like, sure. And help me out. And then not only did she help me out with that, but then she's like, one of my friends needs a grant writer. And then you're spread around. So one of it is it's very helpful when there's not enough of your profession out there. And right now the market is completely unsaturated with grant writers. And if you go out there, they're looking all over. It's not a tremendously desirable role at some organizations, and other organizations, it's an awesome role. What I did with Leighty and Associates was introduce the concept of like fractional grant writers to nonprofits. So I'm not 100% like on federal grants, and I learned this from working on federal grants. I could apply for Angela and I would be like, this grant will cover 50% of my salary. 50% time I'm supposed to be working on the Bureau of Justice Assistance grant. And then the Smith Richardson Foundation covers 25% of my salary, right? So I'm 75% committed. So Pepperdine only actually had to pay 25% of my salary. But then we got another grant and I couldn't put 50% on there. I could only put 25% because you have to be, you can't just lie about it and load yourself up to 275% time or whatever. But I took that same concept and said, I'll work you 50% of the time. You're a 25%. You're a 40%. You're a 35, whatever made sense for them. And went in, and because I'm good at it, I guess, I was able to replace full-time grant writers for less cost. So that's a good selling point when I can say, I will charge you less than it would cost you to hire a full-time grant writer, and I will make you more money. People are generally receptive to at least hearing the rest of that pitch, right? But usually they're calling me because they've already heard I could do it and do that. So like having a track record of success is the best way to do it. And like I got that $8 million grant this year, and that was the biggest that I've done. And I got a lot of calls about that one. Any other questions? Like there's some grant opportunities here. Pepperdine's working on a couple. There's that Robert Wood Johnson grant. Louisa's working on stuff. Dr. Blanco is doing some grants. The easiest way to get experience is to connect with somebody who's doing it already, draft behind them, gain a little experience, and build from there. And grants itself, like I talk to my clients who are small, and they're like, let's write this grant. It's like for like $8 million or $9 million. Like your whole budget is $300,000 a year. Like nobody's gonna give you a grant bigger than what you have. Let's start small. So you build with a couple $2,500 grants, right? Then you do a $5,000 and a $10,000. You take a swing, you get a $25,000. Then you got a $50,000. It's just like building your resume. And that's a grant question. They ask, who else funds you and how much, right? So you put those in, and like sometimes the Virginia Humanities Foundation gives like nothing. Like a big grant for them is like $9,000, and it's a lot of paperwork. Not worth it for the money. It's worth it for the Virginia Humanities Foundation stamp of approval, because then that unlocks all these other funders that are like, if humanities bless this, then it's a good project. Here's $100,000. So you're not actually making money off the Virginia Humanities Foundation, but in an indirect way through their implicit endorsement of your proposal as being like a good idea. So you get to like, you get to move stuff around. There's creativity with it. There's timing issues, lots of things to learn about. And you don't actually have to know that much about your subject matter. You have people who are going to teach you on the fly, and so that part is really cool. So Pepperdine teaches you how to learn about public policy, how to ask the right questions, how to push it a little further. The one thing I would say you should learn is how to write a statement of need. Like a need statement is very similar to doing like a literature review. If you've done lit reviews here, Angela used to make me do lit reviews. I think McAllister used to make me do lit reviews. And so that was a useful skill to translate over. And then just to be comfortable with the idea of writing. Like, I don't know if any of you have taken Kaufman, and if you were the overachiever who turned in like the 130-page paper, maybe that was me. Having a capacity to sit down and a grant is like gonna be 15 pages, right? and just that doesn't scare the crap out of you, you're already like well beyond where some other people are, because they're just like, there's no way we can do that. And that's a major barrier for nonprofits too. They don't have the time to do that. And so that's what we add them, is just the time.
I have another question. Do any of you have questions?
Oh, go ahead.
I wasn't sure. Okay, so it sounds like you do, but maybe not sure. Do you also offer like consultations to people that are nonprofits that are starting or
Yes.
trying? Okay.
I'm a sucker. So all the people call me, and then I dump them through and run them through like, here's what you want to do, and here's your next steps to get you. But that's what Alexis de Tocqueville, I think, called self-interest, rightly understood. Are we remembering this from great books, right? It is in my best interest to help you do that, because if you succeed, one day you're a nonprofit, and when you do get big enough to need a grant writer, who are you going to call other than the guy who helped you start your nonprofit, right? Like, why would I not do that? I don't understand why people don't.
Can we have your email?
Yes, afterwards
Okay.
I'll write it all down for you and all that
Okay.
stuff. So happy to.
Thank you.
I will, after we stop filming, I'll tell you about some of the cool subversive things you can do with grant writing. Like, there's an organization, it's a college that I used to write grants for, and I don't want to give it away. They're in Westwood. And all of their freshman athletes were exempted from freshman orientation. That's pretty common practice around the country, right? Because coaches don't want their athletes in like dumb freshman orientation. They want them training, right? Freshman orientation is where you get sexual assault prevention, like don't drink too much, what's consent. And now, I don't know whether any of those programs are good, right? I don't know the metrics on how effective they are, but I know that it's better that you get that than that you don't get that, right? So when it came time for the next campus violence against women grant, which is a grant that comes out every year, I went to the Title IX office, and I didn't tell anybody, but I just built it in that I was like, could you guys provide this training to all the athletes? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, how much would it cost? And they're like, this much. And I was like, cool. So I just built it in. I didn't like lie to anybody, right? Like I gave it to my bosses and to all them, and I was like, here's the grant. Did you read it? And they're like, yeah, it looks really good. And I didn't mention that there was anything new, but I didn't not like show them anything. So they all signed off on it. And then you get the grant. That's a federally binding contract. So now they have to do it, right? And so you can do little things to push things along and bypass things through grants. People are really willing to discount that future, and they might never agree to something if you're like, would you allow me to do this program? They'd be like, no. But if you're like, will you allow me to write a grant that conceptually could possibly do this program? They're like, yes. And so you get to move things along. People will agree to things hypothetically in a grant that they will never agree to otherwise, right? And that's useful to know as like a policymaker, how to move things along and get things working together. You can bring together large coalitions around a grant opportunity, get them all to buy in. They all got to get their payment, their piece out. You got to subcontract that thing, right, and do it the right way. But now you have a vehicle that mandates that the Boys and Girls Club, the YWCA, and whatever other one all have to sit down together like at least monthly and have a conversation about what's going on. And that has infinitely more use than necessarily the program itself, because now you're creating a community around that, and nobody has to know that you're doing that. You just get to do it quietly yourself. And then later on, they're like, we created this mentoring partnership together. And you're like, cool, who could have seen that coming, right? But they did it themselves, right? You led them to the water. You can't make them drink, but you can do cool stuff. And so there's a limit, you don't want to push your clients too much. You don't want to pull them too much, but you get to put your own stamp in there, right? And you can't be doing it all the time or they'll get mad at you, right? But some of the times you get to do some stuff and you get to add in and say like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if like they're redoing the park across the street from my house. And I was like, all right, it would be cool to have a roof on the basketball courts because it rains a lot in Richmond, and that's like an extra $350. If I get the grant money, will you agree to do that? And they're like, yes. And so like, those sort of things like that where you can really make some changes and push things along. And it also like breaks your brain when it comes to money, because then it stops having any meaning, right? Like where, my goal is to raise $29 million for one of my clients, right? That seems like an insane number, right? Does it seem like a crazy high number? Doesn't to me anymore. Like, because I've just been doing it for a while and I know how capital campaigns work and it's less scary and intimidating, right? And so you start to figure out how it moves and you start to recognize the names. The people who give money in Richmond where I live have been rich since 1737, right? It's still the same old money that they're recycling through. We have a list of all the funniest old people names that we encounter doing this work. My favorite is Gurdon S. Tarbox Jr. It's a real name, and then I was inspired to Google him. Turns out he invented the stabilizer on airplanes, and he and his brother were like second in flight, the first in flight of South Carolina. And there's like a thing in airline safety today known as the Tarbox principle. And in addition to being an awesome band name, that is something I never would have found out if it wasn't for just doing that stuff. So you get to learn, like what I like about it is you never know what you're gonna learn or figure out or end up in a given day, and that's kind of fun. And sometimes you do. There's days that you have to just, do those Bank of America grants and just suck it up and go through it. But then there's other days where you're getting out and doing creative stuff. But for me, there's different types of grant writers, right? I'm a different style than other grant writers. I am extroverted. Most grant writers tend to be introverted. Having a different approach for yourself, being willing to do things yourself. A lot of grant writers sit in their office and they email and they're like, I need the workforce numbers, right? I'll go pull them. I know how to do that. I'm a public policy student. I can pull workforce numbers. I don't need you to do that for me. So my clients are generally appreciate it because I'm like, yeah, I'll write this grant and I only ask them questions that I need answers to. I don't sit there and be like, please write the grant for me and then I'll put it together, right? Like that, there's people that do that. So you got to be creative and figure out you're trying to solve problems for them. How are you solving this problem? Well, with money, right? That's the number one thing that we're doing. But what does that money buy us? What does it do? How does it sustain? We do have to think about sustainability. For my nonprofits, I would rather get two $10,000 grants that are likely to renew next year than one $50,000 grant that's a one and done. They need stability more than riches, right? So slow, steady, increasing growth is good for nonprofits. Giant bags of cash that fall in and then aren't followed up by stuff, terrible. Things are gonna go great for like 2 to 3 years and then they'll absolutely collapse underneath their feet, right? And you do see that happen. So you can be on nonprofit boards. People would be lucky to have some of you, but it depends on where they are. Some nonprofit boards are they have different needs. Boards shift and change. Organization might need subject matter experts because the organization's doing a reconfigure of how they serve their clients, right? Or you need a fundraising board, which is you're doing good and it's like, I need somebody who can write me a $50,000 check and have 10 of their friends write $10,000 checks, right? That's what I need. Can you do that? No, I do not have a space for you on the board, right? And that's how it all works. And it all comes around from like Mackenzie Bezos giving out tons of money like that. On a micro level, that's how the nonprofit ecosystem is sustained in the US. Which could all be changed if we increased our tax levels. We could eliminate this whole thing. So, yeah. Any other questions?
Any other questions, you guys? I want to be mindful of Matt's time.
I would just keep going all day if you guys let me. So I think you can sense that I like.
Can we take you with us?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, Matt, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been amazing. I feel like you should have your own podcast or streaming series on Netflix or something. But thank you so much.
Yeah.
This was wonderful.
Absolutely.
We appreciate you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thanks for having me.